Ugrundy is the second most downloaded tuner in Forza Horizon 5 with over 6 million tune downloads. Despite this, we found out that his tunes were actually worse than default Forza settings nearly a year ago. But are they any better now? That's what we're about to find out. Here's how. At first, we run the tunes on the track to set base times. We will be using fastest lap, average lap times, and some of the best splits as our metrics. Second, we installed the same parts and upgrades as the original tunes, and then apply our own tuning settings to see if we can improve the tune without changing any parts. Third, we completely changed the build while only keeping the same purpose and car class as the original tunes. We compare all the results in the end and give those tunes a score out of 5. I asked multiple other drivers to perform the same tests so we can get more accurate results. This should also tell us if different driving styles or skill levels have an effect on the tune. Here are the tracks we will be testing the tunes on. They are very similar compared to default Forza tracks, with a few adjustments added in. They have a good balance of straights and different types of corners. Time set on these tracks will tell us how good a car will perform for general road and off-road racing. We will be testing 4 different race tunes from Ugrundy in this video. Let's begin. First, we'll be looking at this B-Class road tune for the Porsche 911, which is one of his most downloaded tunes if we exclude seasonal tunes. This tune features all-wheel drive swap and stock tyres, which should give this car good handling. The power to weight ratio, however, is below average. Despite having good handling, this tune was unpredictable and inconsistent for most people. Thanks to sport non-adjustable suspension, this car was very understeering. It was difficult to get this car turning, and when you did, it would usually result in a slide. Many people agreed that this car simply shouldn't have been all-wheel drive swapped. As for the lap times, it barely managed to beat a van around our track. Now, it was time to retune the car to see if we can improve our times without changing any parts. Most people optimized the gearing and used more aggressive anti-roll bars and differential settings. Unfortunately, there wasn't much more to change, which resulted in only small improvements compared to the original tune. The improvement were inconsistent among the bottom half of the drivers, while the other half improved by around 0.3 of a second on average. Overall, the car handled slightly better, but not by much. Now, it was time to change the upgrades and unlock this car's true potential. The vast majority of drivers switched back to rear-wheel drive, which usually makes the car more difficult to drive, but at B-Class and with around 350 horsepower, it shouldn't be that big of a problem. Rear-wheel drive also allows for more power, but some people preferred the handling side and upgraded to street tyres. Some people also went with upgraded brakes and suspension. Using these new builds, 14 out of 16 drivers managed to make huge improvements compared to their previous times. It was clear that Ugrundy's build was far from optimal, and the choice of parts didn't really leave much room for tuning. This tune managed to achieve an average score of 1.5 out of 5. Now, it's time to look at this purest B-Class dirt tune for the R32 Golf, which is also one of Ugrundy's most downloaded dirt tunes. This tune features 350 horsepower and weighs 1.5 tons, which is not exactly fast, but for this car on off-road tyres, it's not too bad. Upon driving the tune, the first and most obvious issue was its gearing. This tune features an adjustable final drive ratio, and yet Ugrundy decided not to use it. The gears are just way too long, and you end up losing a lot of power. The other issue with this tune was its suspension. Stiff springs and soft bump settings made this tune very bouncy and unstable. On top of that, most people found this tune to be understeering. Anyway, here are the times we managed to set around the track. Now, it was time to change the settings to see if we can make the tune better. Fortunately, we had much more freedom when it came to tuning this car. Shorter gears, softer and more stable suspension, and more aggressive anti-roll bars is what everyone chose to do. The car now felt much better to drive. Here are the lap times. Looking at the top half, we see small improvements in the fastest lap, but bigger improvements in average lap time. On the bottom half, however, improvements are much bigger across all metrics. It looks like the stability improvements made this car much more consistent and easier to drive. Now, for the upgrades, you have to decide if you want weight reduction or more horsepower. While the heavier build is slightly faster on Horizon tracks, the lighter build is easier to drive and handles a bit better. Most people went with one of these two routes. It's also worth mentioning that the original build used upgraded brakes, which wasn't really needed and everyone ended up removing them. Our new builds ended up being considerably faster around the track. Everyone managed to improve their times without any exception. In the end, the upgrade choices on the original tune weren't half bad, but the tuning was just awful. This tune managed to achieve an average score of 1.9 out of 5. The next tune is an S1 class road build for Gunther's Werks 911, which is one of Ugrundy's most recent tunes. It features all-wheel drive, semi-slick tyres and a really good power to weight ratio. This tune looked decent on paper, but when we drove it, it was the exact opposite. This car somehow felt worse than PTG Jamie's 911 and Nalek's R35. It just doesn't turn. You have to lift for corners that almost every all-wheel drive car can take flat out. The understeer was unreal, and it's even worse when you are on the throttle. Here are the times we managed to set around the track. For comparison, S1 class Jeep Willys is only 1 second slower than this tune. Now, let's see if there is a way to make this tune drivable. Fortunately, the suspension is adjustable and everyone tuned it for much more oversteer. The gearing also had room for improvement. These adjustments made the tune much better, but the car was still understeering. Here are the lap times. On average, we see over 1 second of improvement consistent across the board, which is a lot, and this car has even more potential, so let's change the upgrades. Front aero was the most common upgrade choice, which fixed the understeer issue. The majority upgraded to slick tyre compound and some people upgraded the brakes. The drivetrain choice was mixed between rear and all-wheel drive. While rear-wheel drive was faster, all-wheel drive was considerably easier. Regardless, everyone made huge improvements using their new builds. On average, we see around 2.5 seconds of improvement, which is the highest we had in any tune review. Front aero turned out to have the highest impact on the tune. You can spot the two drivers who were stuck with rear aero, as they have much smaller improvements. In the end, this was one of the worst tunes that everyone in this test has ever driven, which managed to achieve an average score of 0.7 out of 5. The last tune is an A-class road build for this Firebird, which is another recent tune from Ugrundy. It features all-wheel drive, rally tyres, 630 horsepower and 1300 kilos of weight, which is pretty balanced for A-class road. Having driven the other 3 tunes from Ugrundy, this one was a bit better, but the understeer was still present. The gears were also slightly all over the place in a typical Ugrundy fashion. Stock brakes on this car have poor performance and many people had issues with them. Anyway, here are the lap times, which we'll get back to later. For now, let's see if we can improve this tune by changing the settings. The adjustments we made were similar to the other tunes, with the goal being more oversteer. This resulted in around 6/10 of improvement on average. Overall, the results are very similar compared to the previous tunes, so let's change the upgrades. This tune is apparently intended for a road rivals track. For handling base tracks, even a Ford F450 on racing slicks is going to be faster than this tune. As for other tracks, a rear-wheel drive Powerbird version of this car will be much faster, and that's what 2 of us did. Other drivers used either rear or all-wheel drive balance builds, with the main upgrade changes being front aero and better brakes. We ran our new builds around the track and here are the results. Power builds improved by over 4 seconds over the original tune, while balance builds improved by only around 1.5 seconds. In the end, this tune was maybe a bit better than the others, but it was still underwhelming, and it managed to achieve an average score of 1.9 out of 5. While Ugrundy is mostly known for his seasonal tunes, he had the most votes and comments to be featured in a tune review. His race tunes are no longer slower than default Forza settings, but they are nowhere near good. I could hardly find anything positive about them. His builds all seem to use all-wheel drive swap with little to no front grip upgrades. It doesn't seem like he actually spends any time testing his tunes and just carelessly applies some preset settings that lean towards understeer. Some say his tunes are intended for beginners, but as seen in this video, excessive amounts of understeer doesn't make your tune easier or more consistent for drivers at any skill level. And that's everything. Let me know whose tunes we should try out next, and if you want to participate in these tests, you can do so by joining the Discord server linked in the description. Thanks for watching and goodbye.